I call the August 17th, 2021 regular meeting of council to order. I will give the invocation this evening. Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this day. Help us to use good judgment for the business at hand and guide us in wisdom and a continuing sense of truth and fairness for the community we represent.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Here.
Mr. Marn?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Donovan?
Here.
Mrs. Dowling?
Here.
Mr. Kirchner?
Here.
Mr. Krieger?
Here.
The next regular meeting of council will be September 7th, where council will be back to the normal 7 p.m. start time. Approval of minutes. Council, you received the minutes of the July 6th, 2021 regular meeting.
Move to approve the July 6, 2021 regular meeting.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
The minutes of the July 6, 2021 regular meeting have been approved. Public hearings, we have none. Tabled legislation, we have none. New legislation, ordinance number 21-0-044.
An ordinance to authorize advances of funds and revisions to appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Malinowski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Members of council, this ordinance firstly authorizes a temporary cash advance out of the city's general fund in the amount of $112,236. And this is for the most recent NOPEC 2021 grant. And then secondly, there are numerous appropriation revisions that are recommended for increases in spending that are occurring in several funds, as noted. I would recommend approval. Thank you.
Move to
Counsel?
suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-044 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-045.
An ordinance authorizing a settlement agreement in the matter of Ralph Victor Construction, Inc. versus City of Mentor et al., amending the codified ordinances of the City of Mentor 2006 as amended and the official zoning map by the rezoning pursuant to development plan of permanent parcels 16D 107-000-005 and 019 located at Mallard Court from R4 Single Family Residential District to RVG Village Green District and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zeman, would you please comment on this legislation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of council. Ralph Victor, as the title of the ordinance indicates, Ralph Victor Construction has proffered to the city a proposed settlement agreement for pending litigation, as well as other claims related to these two permanent parcels. Again, this application originally arose under the old RVG zoning district regulations. The proposed settlement agreement, in my judgment, addresses many, if not all, of the concerns, both raised at the Planning Commission as well as the City Council levels. It will meet with my recommendation for approval, but I understand that it may be left on first reading for tonight.
Mr. President,
Mr. Krieger,
yes, I'd like to put this on first reading.
any further discussion? Ordinance number 21-0-045 has received its first reading. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm out of order. We still need a motion.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-045 has received its first reading. Ordinance number 21-0-046.
An ordinance approving the final subdivision and dedication plat of the Ridgewood Green subdivision Phase 3 on Badeos Drive at permanent parcel number 16A001000090 in the RVG Village Green District.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. Members of council, the applicant is requesting final approval for Phase 3 of the Ridgewood Green subdivision, consisting of 27 sublots on a total of 18.65 acres. With the completion of this phase, the subdivision will have a total of 121 sublots, with 114 of those located in the city of Mentor, and the remaining sublots located in the city of Willoughby. The amount of open space proposed within Phase 3 is just over 9 acres, which is consistent with the approved development plan for the subdivision. At their July 8, 2021 meeting, the Planning Commission reviewed the Ridgewood Greens final plat Phase 3 and recommended approval of the plat by a vote of 5-1 with the conditions outlined at the end of the staff report.
Move to
Counsel.
suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-046 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-047.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute a change order to DB Bentley, Inc. for Stockbridge and Dartmoor Storm Sewer Improvements Project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Swigert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. It is the city's intent to execute a change order to the contract for the Stockbridge and Dartmoor Storm Sewer Improvement Project for a total not to exceed $107,878.13. This amount is necessary to compensate the contractor for additional time and material quantities that were necessary to complete the contract as intended due to unforeseen conflicts. The amount also includes costs for proposed installation of 5 new inlet basins on Dartmoor Road and then an additional inlet basin on Stockbridge Road for proper roadway drainage. Just to mention a few of the unforeseen conflicts, the majority of this cost was associated with additional trench and paving width on Mentor Avenue resulting from heavy groundwater conditions affecting side slope stability of the trench. Elevation conflicts with the existing sanitary sewer laterals on both Stockbridge and Dartmoor Roads, where the sanitary and storm sewers were practically at the same elevation for the length of the project. There was also an unknown void under Dartmoor Road, which had to be corrected. Proposed work for replacement of 2 undersized inlet basins on Dartmoor Road, installation of 3 new inlet basins on Dartmoor Road, and the installation of the additional drain on Stockbridge. But the resulting total cost is approximately $165,000, and after applying the $70,000 contingency item and other line item adjustments, the result is the $107,878.13. Your approval is recommended. Project expected to be completed in about the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-047 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-048.
Ordinance approving and authorizing the city manager to execute a labor agreement on behalf of the city of Mentor with the Laborers International Union of North America, Local Union 860, AFL-CIO, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. San Pedro.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Council, I'm happy to announce this is the last negotiation for the current set of contracts that run through '23. And after a lengthy negotiation period, we did settle on a tentative agreement that you've had before you since last week. Basically, the main piece of that is a wage increase in the first year of 2%, 2.5% this current year, 2.5% the following year. Does follow mostly what we did with police and fire units, but there were some additional changes to the contract, and that was also reflected in the first year wages. but the administration recommends that this agreement be approved by council, and we'll have all of our unions under contract.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-048 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-049.
An ordinance amending Part 1, Title 5, Section 151.13 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mentor 2006 as amended, the same related to compensation for employees, authorizing the city manager to increase compensation for non-bargaining unit personnel pursuant to Section 151.16 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we didn't want to bring any proposed increases for our non-bargaining employees to council until we had our final labor agreement settled. Now that that's done, we bring to you a proposal to increase compensation for non-bargaining employees for the year 2021, retroactive to April 1st, in the amount of 2.5%.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-049 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-050.
Not the only one. An ordinance levying special assessments for acquiring, constructing, installing, equipping, improving, maintaining, and repairing improvements together with all appurtenances thereto necessary to abate erosion along properties within the city which are included within the Lake Communities Shoreline Special Improvement District and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Zampedro.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. One point of order, and I'll look to the law director. The instruction from the Lake Communities County Shoreline SID was to ensure that the resolution of necessity precede this ordinance, which is basically this is basically the assessing ordinance. So we need a resolution of necessity to come first, followed by this one. So I would suggest that that was in the staff report, and if we could make that happen, I think that is the way the SID council and bond council would prefer to see it, but I'll defer to the law director.
If that was their recommendation, then, you know, we've really deferred to them relative to this special improvement district, so I have no problem with that recommendation, if that's what they want.
Are we going to give it first reading?
We would
or table?
request that Resolution 108 go first.
Yeah, but we can do first reading.
I'll look to the law director.
No,
We were,
It's kind of, to me, it's de facto concurrent passage. I don't know if there's anything about a few minutes delay between the one resolution and the ordinance. I think the suggestion is to take Resolution 21R108, act upon that first, and then circle back to 050.
Okay.
Got it. We'll change the agenda order then and jump to resolution number 21-R-108.
A resolution declaring it necessary and determining to proceed with acquiring, constructing, installing, equipping, improving, maintaining, and repairing improvements necessary for making improvements to abate erosion along properties within the city included within the Lake Communities Shoreline Special Improvement District, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Resolution number 21-R-108 has been approved. Returning,
President,
Mr.
with respect
Kirchner.
to the ordinance number 21-050, I move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Approve.
Second.
Move to approve.
Mr. Landig?
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
One second.
Ordinance number 21.
Wait,
Oh.
I've got a question on that.
Yes, sir.
Nope. How much money are we talking about in these improvement? It doesn't state, it just says he gets a loan at, what, 2.75%?
The current rate is, the rate won't be determined until they close on the bonds, which will happen in
And
September.
does each
but
property owner determine how much they want to spend or how much they're borrowing?
They have, so there's a lengthy plan specs and cost estimates on file with our clerk that were submitted to the SID. So the answer to that is yes, but it's also supported by the value of the property, because that's what is the underlying security to that assessment, just like any assessment
So
we have.
So one property owner could be asking for $100,000, another one could be asking for 50.
Correct.
Okay, I just wondered how that worked. Okay, yes.
But I did want to add, though,
Okay.
too, just because this is an ongoing process. This is the first round in Lake County. The second round will happen in mid-2022. I've been dealing with 5 or 6 other property owners who've expressed interest but haven't been shovel-ready. But again, I'm hoping that certainly more and more of our shoreline owners will try to look at this program, maybe take advantage of it, because it certainly does defray some of the immediate cost of these
Could
improvements.
have Ante put that out on public?
We have done,
Okay.
we have done that in the past, but I want to take the opportunity on air just to let our folks know that this program is ongoing, and this is simply the first round.
So 5 or 6 that are in the wings, and how many are already shovel-ready?
Just this, Mentor has one project, and there's roughly 30 attributed to the 13 communities that are members of the SID. So about, on average, three a community, we're at 1.
Very good.
Mr. President, I guess one question, sometime maybe give us a list of who's involved with this 13, I know 14 total, if we can know who the other cities are and how that money is assessed and where's it at and.
Yeah, so sure, we'll provide that to you. That's, I think we had that information as part of the initial legislation. But since that time, it's essentially all of the Lake County,
Right.
lakefront communities, plus the city of Euclid that join. And in terms of the financing, because this is a special improvement district, it falls back, the financing is privately financed through a bank. They found so unlike some of the assessments that we would do here, we're not on the hook if the homeowner fails to meet their obligations. It would be covered by the SID or at the risk of the finance agent. So there's very little risk, if any, to the actual municipality in this case, which is a nice thing about these special improvement districts, and one of the reasons why it required additional legislation at the state level to put this together. It's a nice program. It allows people, I think the benefit of these programs is less about the financing being available. It's as much important that it runs with the property, just like any other assessment. So if you live on the shoreline and you have to spend money to shore up, to protect yourself from the high water, and that's really why all these are bundled up together. So many of these projects probably wouldn't have even been conceived if the lake levels weren't up to where they were. You know, if those homes are sold and bought like any other assessment, that'll run with that property, and the next owner is on the hook for those additional assessments. So.
You mentioned Euclid, how far east do we go? Geneva, Madison, all the way out that?
Do you know most of these?
I believe it-
I know
I
North
believe-
Perry's in.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was all of the shoreline communities in Lake County and Euclid.
Okay, appreciate it.
They're
Thank
the
you.
only non-Lake County community. And I think they joined because I don't think they got their act quite together like Lake County
They
has
did
on
join
this.
us, yeah, they joined later.
Thank you.
Yes.
We good with this discussion?
thank you.
Okay, without any further erosion in my place in the agenda, ordinance number 21-0-050 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-051.
An ordinance determining to proceed with the improvement of streets hereinafter mentioned within the termini designated by supplying such streets with electric street lighting and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and not to be repetitive here, but we would respectfully request that the resolution of necessity precede this ordinance, which, be 107?
No, that's not right. The one levy assessments comes.
Sidewalks.
We got this right. That's right.
Oh, I'm sorry, yep.
It's right.
Is that what you want to do?
No, we're good.
I did the resolution, yeah. They're good. Yeah, we're fine. Ordinance 51, thank you.
Okay.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
No.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-051 has been approved. Ordinance number 21-0-052.
An ordinance to levy assessments for the improvement of various streets in the city of Mentor by supplying said streets with electric street lighting and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Yeah, just a quick mention. This is a little bit less expensive this year. We did reduce the amount from $1.20 to $1.15 per lineal foot
Very
Move to
good.
per
suspend.
assessed valuation.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
No.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Ordinance number 21-0-052 has been approved. Resolution number 21-R-106.
A resolution authorizing the city manager to reallocate funds in fiscal year 2020 Community Development Block Grant Action Plan for the purchase of a handicap-accessible kayak ramp and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Mr. Kaminsky is still with us, apparently not. But we've talked about some of the many improvements that are being considered at the marina. Among those is the handicap-accessible kayak ramp access. We're able to allocate a portion of this to available funding through our CDBG accounts, and it would require us to slightly modify our existing action plan in order to accomplish that. That's what this resolution does.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marne.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling.
Just with one comment, I can't say how pleased I am to see this. I think if anything positive has come out of the COVID, I think it's how much the residents are enjoying that facility. And opening it up to another segment of our residents is really important, so yes.
Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Resolution number 21-R-106 has been adopted. Resolution number 21-R-107.
A resolution declaring the necessity of repairing and reconstructing certain sidewalks in zones 2D and 3C associated with the 2021 pedestrian safety program in the city of Mentor, requiring that abutting property owners repair same, ratifying and confirming notices, authorizing repair or reconstruction of said sidewalks by the city engineer in certain cases, providing for assessment of cost, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Swigger, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Between May and July of this year, the city completed sidewalk inspections in Zone 2D and 3C of Wards 2 and 3, which is part of the city west of State Route 306, south of Mentor on the Lake, just east of the Willoughby Corp line and north of Mentor Avenue. The locations of the properties with deficient sidewalk have been identified in Exhibit A. A total of 618 parcels out of 1,029 were found to have deficient sidewalk. Over 2,000 sidewalk slabs were found to have deficiencies requiring repair or replacement. Of this total, the city will be replacing 246 slabs adjacent to existing street trees and 513 slabs related to manhole, utility main, and storm sewer main issues, which would be settlement over those utilities. Additionally, the city will be reconstructing 89 accessible ramps at intersections. Homeowners will be responsible for the remaining 1,325 slabs to be repaired or replaced. This legislation is a resolution of necessity, which declares that it is necessary to repair the sidewalk deficiencies identified in Exhibit A in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code and the Mentor Municipal Code. Upon council approval of this resolution, property owners will be notified and provided 45 days to make the repairs. Repairs not made within 45 days will then be made by the city's sidewalk contractor, with costs being assessed back to the property owners. Thank you.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Just a question for the administration. In this era of increased prices, how did we do relative to past years on the cost of a slab to the residents? Do you have an
In this
idea?
case, we've used past costs to estimate the costs, but so we haven't bid
We
this
haven't bid
work.
them yet, that's right, so we won't see that till the bids
Next
come
time,
in.
next
Okay,
piece of
so you
legislation.
kept the estimate the same?
Kind of.
Hopeful.
Mr. President, I will say this, I mean, concrete is probably one of the
Concrete's been
few
pretty
things
steady.
that hasn't really gone up in any meaningful way.
Don't say it.
Supplies, well,
It's labor intensive, though.
in fact, we've done pretty well
well.
this year with asphalt prices as well, which you would expect would be going up because of the petroleum increases. But again, we bid our contracts out back in January, so that helped in our case. I don't know what they're getting now, but
Yeah.
higher.
Okay, I believe we have a motion and a second. Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Which one? Resolution number 21-R-107 has been adopted. Resolution number 21-R-109.
A resolution to accept the material terms of the One Ohio subdivision settlement pursuant to the One Ohio Memorandum of Understanding and consistent with the terms of the July 21st, 2021 National Opioid Settlement Agreement and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zeman, could you comment on this?
Yes,
resolution?
Mr. President, members of council. The Ohio Attorney General has proffered a proposed settlement, an opioid-related litigation, and this proposed settlement pertains to 3 distributors, specifically Amerisource, Bergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson. I'm sure the council is well aware of all the national level of litigation related to the opioid epidemic by both manufacturers and distributors and other alleged responsible persons in that chain. This proposed settlement with the identified entities would provide up to $800 million to the state of Ohio. A percentage of that would go directly to the state of Ohio. About 30% of that would be divided amongst Ohio political subdivisions, and the balance would go to a new foundation. The foundation would establish those funds available to Ohio political subdivisions. I'm not sure how that will work, but that is the claim. The reason to sign off on this is that the amount of the proposed settlement is dependent on whether or not these companies will have to continue to defend and potentially pay political subdivisions throughout the state of Ohio on separate cases. Mentor has not, in its own name, brought any litigation, but there are some communities in the state of Ohio who have or potentially could. And so the idea being that that $800-some million would represent a cap, depending on the number of Ohio political subdivisions that would sign off on this and not pursue any independent litigation. Also, there's a provision in the settlement if the General Assembly were to prevent Ohio political subdivisions from bringing their own independent causes of action post-date of passage of such a statute. So there's a lot of variables in this. What does that mean? On the low end, $300-some thousand potentially available to the city. On the high end, maybe about $500,000 potentially available to the city. All those funds would be earmarked specifically for addressing the effects of the opioid epidemic. I don't have any strong feelings about passage or not. I would recommend it if the Ohio Attorney General and believes that this is a good settlement against these entities, then I'd certainly defer to the AG's judgment in that matter. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Zeman, at what point would the city start to look into programming? Is it premature, or is it time?
I think it's
Would it come
premature.
with guidelines?
There are going to be guidelines relative to permissive use of the funds, and I think that's really something the administration would have to take a deep dive on. To me, it's going to be community-specific. It may be educational for this community. It may be something in addition to that. But I'd certainly defer to the administration relative to what those specific funds would be, because they would have, I mean, I prosecute people, so I see one aspect of it, but obviously addressing the opioid epidemic is a much broader, issue than what I deal with specifically.
And I don't expect details from the administration, but if you have thought.
No, but I can certainly, with that amount, and it's distributed over a 10-year period, so you're looking at maybe $30,000 to $50,000 a year. At that level of funding, it would be hard for us to create some type of program that would be meaningful, probably. What I foresee is maybe a coalition of groups, say Lake County collectively, utilizing that money to maybe pooling that money together to provide support to perhaps existing agencies who could use it. Obviously, there are a number of agencies that we already support through our CDBG programming or through public funding. I could foresee it more likely going in that direction, but who knows?
Thank you. Council, what is your pleasure?
Move to suspend.
Second, but question, I guess, for the law director. I guess I don't understand in terms of, so every municipality / township in Ohio would have to pass this?
No.
How would it work? That's why
Yeah.
I don't understand how it works.
They need to get to that 800 million level, either the General Assembly asks to basically prevent further lawsuits from political subdivisions, or failing that, then there's contingencies. So if 95% of the public political subdivisions were to sign off on this, obviously then that kind of provides these companies the assurance that they can pay the better part of that $800 million without having to defend additional lawsuits and potentially paying additional damages to individual communities. So that $800 million is a cap.
Cap, then.
Correct. It could be substantially less depending on what other, actors do out there in the state.
Got it, okay.
Mr.
Thank you.
President,
Ms. Dowler?
just a quick question. Is this something that could be used in our Menor drug
read it
court?
when I
I
looked
mean,
at
that could be advantageous for that?
I've actually already spoken to Judge Trebas about that, so potentially, yes.
And our drug costs go up.
We have a motion for suspension and a second. Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Resolution number 21-R-109 has been adopted. Second reading, there are none. Third reading, none. Manager's report. Ken?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. Council, we do have one open cut request. It is for 7350 Palisades Parkway from Town Center Construction for a new water service line for the new Rainforest Car Wash project.
Mr. President?
Mr.
seeing how-
Kirchner.
Seeing how this work is going to be done at night, I move to approve.
Second.
please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Pavement open cut at 7350 Palisades Parkway has been approved. Please continue.
Thank you. Council, one of the few appointments that I have is to the Lake County General Health District Board. It does require council's approval. Asking council to approve the appointment of Patricia Murphy for an additional 5-year term, which would commence August 1 of this year and carry on through July 31st of 2026. She has done a very good job on our behalf and has been very communicative throughout her 5 years on there.
Bless you.
And so I strongly recommend her reappointment.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
The reappointment of Patricia Murphy of the Lake County Health District Board has been affirmed.
Thank you, Council. Council, last week the city received a number of large rain events totaling about 7 inches of rain in total in that week's period. Very big events, as you've all experienced. The most impactful storm occurred last Friday evening, where we had nearly 2 inches of rainfall in about a 1-hour period. Generally speaking, this type of intensity overwhelms our stormwater system, which is why we received a good number of complaints about, I wouldn't say a lot, but a handful of complaints about ponding in some of the streets. We received some complaints about backyard flooding. But this is really not an abnormal event for that type of rain event, and because it goes well beyond the capacity of our stormwater system. I think it's important that we remind our residents that when we have that kind of intense rain, that it's better that rain is accumulating in the streets and in your backyards and not in your basements. And in fact, we're not aware of any basement-related complaint that we've heard that was somehow related to our storm sewer. We did get a couple of complaints about water infiltration. People got some water coming in through the walls of their basement, but that's more of a groundwater issue and pressure because of the height of that groundwater. So there are still a number of individual complaints that we're happy to check out. I've got some information to a couple of council members who asked about specific complaints, and we did follow up on those, and I'll follow up with council members individually on that. But overall, again, pretty good example that some of the large detention facilities that we've invested heavily in paid off for us. You're still going to see some events that are going to overwhelm our system, and again, but we can live with water accumulation for temporary periods. What we can't live with is water in the basement, and we're doing better with that. And in fact, I'm not aware, and I don't know if anyone else has any information, but I'm not aware of any sanitary-related backups in our city either. Mr. Swigger, you haven't heard anything yet about that, right? So far, so good. Tonight, Men of Rocks welcomes STP2, a Stone Temple Pilots tribute band. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the 10 band, who was originally scheduled tonight, was unable to perform. We are happy that STP was able to fill in and satisfy that grunge night appeal that everybody wants every year. City Fest is also this Friday and Saturday, and we ask residents to check out the city's website for our scheduled events. The parade will step off at its usual time of 10 a.m. on Saturday, leaving from Shore Middle School. Mentor Police Department will join other law enforcement agencies across the state of Ohio in support of the 2021 Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign that begins tomorrow and runs through September 6th. With schools beginning to open soon, we would like to remind motorists to be aware that children will be out and about and to be more cautious, to pay close attention to school zones. And this week and next week, the Fire Prevention Bureau will be conducting their annual building inspections at all Mentor schools. And we're happy to see the kids getting back to school, and we're be prepared for that. So that's all, Council.
Clerk's correspondence. Julie?
Council is in receipt of Mentor Municipal Court June 2021 and July 2021 month-end reports. Council is also in receipt of liquor license, new permit for AM Azteca MX LLC DBA Azteca Mexican Restaurant and Tequila Bar at 9515 Diamond Center Drive. Also, a liquor license, new, for Nostalgia Lounge, Inc., DBA Nostalgia Lounge at 8484 Menor Avenue. That is all.
Commission/committee reports. Meeting minutes, Municipal Planning Commission, May 27th, 2021, and June 17th, 2021. Board of Building and Zoning Appeals, June 8th, 2021, and July 13th, 2021. Tree Commission, June 9th, 2021. Old business, council.
I guess I have one thing, Mr. President. A couple of things I need the administration maybe help me out with. The outages, First Energy. One of our neighboring communities brought First Energy in and had a discussion about what they're going to do with the grid and all that. And you know, the people over in Midland and Westmore in that area are losing power 5-6 times a week. And I know it's a huge question, but maybe we could get someone in here and give them an explanation of, you know, they're constantly resetting their computers, their clocks, and it's not fair, and we just need someone to give us an answer of, are they working on something for us? Are they trying to help us out? Or it's constantly going on, and you guys know, because we've all been involved with it, and I think it happens in probably most of the wards, but just that little thing, and then if you could, Dave, if you could look into Barbary, the flooding. I mean, I know we did a lot down there last year. We put some money into the back behind the houses and all that. And I don't believe, like Mr. Flipiak said, that there was any water in the basements, which is a huge thing. If you have water in your yard and water in the ditches, it's better than being in your house. But I guess the next question will be for next year. What do you think we're going to do with this lifeguard situation and all the pools getting open? Because we're going to have 300 more houses coming into Ward 2, and I'm sure we could probably fill that pool with people and kids. But I know this situation's been very odd with the hiring of restaurants, lifeguards. I've never seen anything like it before, and that's about all I got. If you could help me out with some of those things. And
Yeah, so I think I'd mentioned at the start of my report that we have a few of those individual concerns that we were following up. The Barbary is one, and I can give you an update on that immediately after the council meeting.
thank you.
With respect to the lifeguards, we have actually been talking a lot about what to do next year. I know, Councilman, your concern is that we open Garfield next year, and I'd love nothing more than to have all 3 pools open next year. That would be our goal. One thing I can tell you that we'll be doing is we'll be conducting, because let's face it, there are fewer people who are interested in working this year. I don't know if that situation will perpetuate in future years. Time will tell. One of the things that we would like to be able to do is increase the supply of available workers. And when it comes to lifeguards, it requires getting them certified well in advance of the season opening. So our department has in the past conducted educational training that would then certify at the end of that training them individuals who go through that as lifeguards. We will be conducting additional classes for that this winter in anticipation of trying to have those people express some level of loyalty and come to work for us. We guarantee them jobs if they go through that training with us. Doesn't mean that they will. They could train with us and go to work for the city of Willoughby or whomever, but increasing the supply of available employees is one thing we know will be a step in the right direction. I know that Mr. Kaminsky and I have talked about this, and I've talked about this with a number of the other mayors in Lake County. The idea of simply raising wages isn't necessarily an answer for us, because if we raise, they're all around that $9 to $11 range, depending on how long they've been working, and most of the cities are consistent in that regard. You bump that up to $15, all you've done is set the market. Now, every other community has to go to that level, and we're right back where we started from, simply paying 40 or 50% higher wage rates. So I think the answer is to do our best to continue to attract people into into that pool of applicants, and hope that at some point in time here, people start to have a need to start taking these jobs on again. It's not just at the pools. I've mentioned many times we're struggling to find people across the board, including in permanent positions.
I'm glad you're discussing it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
On the First Energy thing, though, is there any way we could,
So I think
It's a tough one,
fair
I know.
well, it's fair to say that we have an ongoing conversation with First Energy, and we've many times over the years brought them in and sat them down. Many members of this council, yourself included, have engaged in those conversations. I think every president of council has sought out and received those meetings. And to be fair, to be balanced, they have made improvements to our system. They have done maintenance at our request that I think, quite frankly, wouldn't have happened without the prompting of council and the administration. I'm not aware that Midland is experiencing that level of frequency. I don't know of any place in the city that's out 5-6 times in the course of a week. Obviously, on big rain events and storm events and high winds, we're going to see more of that. What we tell our residents, this is very important, is to call every time it's out. To call them, document those occurrences, and if we're in communication with those residents, share that information with us. Because
Okay.
without our knowledge of it, we can't say, hey, we know for a fact that that Midland, that this address at Midland was out on these dates.
Yeah.
And then because First Energy does keep a log, and we assume that log is fairly and accurately and honestly represented when we mention a problem area. And best thing we can do is just have data to back that up.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
We can continue that conversation, though, for
Thank you.
sure.
Also under old business, I can count, and I think other councilmen can identify with this, on one hand, no, two hands, the type of emails that I got halfway through the 7-inch spate of rain that we had last week. This was Tuesday night. The resident writes, "The basin works." With that rain we had this morning, this is the Rice Detention Pond Basin. With that rain we had this morning, our yard would have been flooded, and so would Brooks. But we are dry as a bone. First Basin has some water in it, and the ditch in between has some. Just wanted you to know. And this was a resident that was actively involved in the process there, a little skepticism at first. So it's really gratifying, and everybody should take, and council for funding that. Remember, we bought that from the school board, and that process of getting that was a struggle with the environmental issues. It took us longer, as do everything involving environmental. But to have that in there. Then on Friday night, of course, we had the big part of that 7 inches, 2 inches plus. So I texted her, I said, "Are you still doing
now?"
okay?" And she wrote back, she said, "Well, flooding in the front, flooding in the back, but it dissipated very quickly, and Brooks is dry as a bone. The basin is working perfectly." So, and farther out, as we get the effects of the basin dampen, if you will, with the rainfall, but this was great. This was good news. So thanks, Dave, for your part in this and following up on all the questions from last week's rain. Appreciate the administration's support.
Mr. President.
Mr. Kirschner.
And I can testify that the Bellflower Detention Basin also worked perfectly, because with that kind of rain, there would have been a lot of calls, a lot of flooding, possible sanitary backup as well, and we got nothing. So it was perfect. All those battles with the Corps of Engineers and congressmen and senators helping out paid off.
I'm not aware of a single complaint downstream of Two-Town, and that area would have been swamped in years past.
Yes, yes. We've come a
Indian
long
streets
ways.
there.
It's really, really encouraging. So I think the residents that suffered the most really appreciate it. Any other old business? Okay, new business. Council needs to consider nominations to appoint one elector of the City of Mentor to serve the remainder of a four-year term on the Board of Building and Zoning Appeals ending 12/31/21. Council, are there any nominations?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake.
I would like to nominate Charles Pinkerman to the Board of Building and Zoning Appeals, term ending 12/31/21.
Are there any others? Hearing no other nominations, I'll entertain a motion to appoint Charles Pinkerman.
So moved.
Second? You need a second, or no?
Yes. Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Charles Pinkerman has been appointed to serve the remainder of a four-year term on the Board of Building and Zoning Appeals ending 12/31/21. Does anyone have anything to discuss under new business? Hearing none. Persons before council. Clerk, do we have any? Having none. Is there any other business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Kirchner.
I would move to move into executive session to conference with the law director related to pending litigation.
Second?
Julie, please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Here we go.
Yeah, but it could.
Mr. President, I move that we go back into regular council session.
Second?
Please call the roll.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Council, if there's no more regular business, I move to adjourn.
Second?
This meeting is adjourned.
Mr.
All right.
Council?